And now we welcome you into the portion of Liberty Nation which we call Talkin' Liberty. Makes sense, doesn't it? As we welcome in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
A week of drama surrounding the showdown on the shutdown, but there was a lot of other things that went on this week.
That's right.
Not the least of which was the sentencing, or lack thereof, of Michael Flynn and the, let me see if I can put it diplomatically, the curious behavior of the judge in the case. He threw out the word treason, said he might have been a traitor to his country after he had said, "You sure you want to stick with your guilty plea?" I can't figure it out. I don't know anybody else who can. Maybe you can.
Judge Emmet Sullivan is the person we're talking about, federal district court judge, and I don't have an answer for you, Tim. It is bizarre. Perhaps, Judge Sullivan is not a young man. Perhaps he was having a senior moment. It's difficult to.
That's the most logical explanation.
Well, he actually alleged that Flynn committed crimes that the special prosecutor, special counsel himself, had not brought against Flynn.
The prosecutors actually
had to stand up in court and basically tell the judge, yes,
that we didn't even allege
no, Your
this.
Honor, yeah. And the scuttlebutt, by the way, on a couple legal blogs that I pay attention to, is that his clerks basically called him off the bench and gave him, the, hey, you are really screwing up here, and that's what caused him to sort of go back. And then he said, because he had called Flynn, he didn't call him directly a traitor. He said, "You traitorous," I think is what he used. He talked around it, but he used some form of the word traitor more than once to describe Flynn, and no one has alleged, that Mr. Flynn is a traitor to his country, that he sold us out to someone. It's just a reporting, it's a paperwork crime that he committed.
Right. I've never seen.
Nancy Pelosi doesn't even say that.
I know. I mean, I have never seen, maybe you have, a prosecutor actually defend the defendant he's trying to prosecute to the judge. And the judge throws out the T word, treason, and then comes back later and says, "Well, I was just curious."
Yeah.
What?
And it presents a problem for Mr. Flynn. He has sort of three choices here, and one of them is to withdraw or attempt to withdraw his guilty plea. Now, that plea's already been entered, so the court could allow it to come back, but it's already been entered. I mean, if anybody deserves to see a lenient sentence, you would think it would be somebody who has no record at all, right, who this seems to be an anomaly for, who poses no risk to the community or of reoffending.
And was once a military hero.
Yeah, this guy is... Yeah, that's a good plug, too.
I mean,
right.
It just makes no sense, but nevertheless, Michael Flynn will spend Christmas, New Year's, 3 more months twisting in the wind.
It's unfortunate. He will not benefit, Tim, from the criminal justice bill that did pass this week. That bill has it's a long way to go for what I think would be a really robust criminal justice reform in this country, but baby steps in the right direction are still movement in the right direction, so that's a good thing.
It's a truly bipartisan bill. I mean, we saw the Farm Bill, so in this bitter partisan atmosphere, we've actually seen a couple of bipartisan things happen. You saw a joint press conference with Republicans and Democrats together. When's the last time you saw that?
Well, with Trump and Pelosi in the Oval, but that was a different kind of thing.
That was a different kind of photo op. Bump stocks now banned by the Trump administration. They came to infamy during the Las Vegas massacre several months ago. And the question is, Scott, is this the camel's nose under the tent, the thin end of the wedge to more extensive gun control?
I find this profoundly troubling, Tim. What has happened is that the Trump administration has declared these devices equal a machine gun. And so for the purpose of the law, you now possess a machine gun illegally if you possess one of these devices in 90 days after it's published in the Federal Register, okay? So 90 days plus a few from now, that's when this regulation will go into effect, and you will be a felon. So if you think about it, there are people who are deployed. Military guys tend to like guns a lot. There are people who are on deployment who won't come home for 90 days. They're felons the day they return back on U.S. soil because they're going to possess a bump stock. I think it is profoundly troubling. I don't see it as the camel's nose under the tent, but it's just one more in another layer of laws, Tim, and this is what so many gun owners reject against. It is the implementation of laws that we know will yield no safety benefit.
Right.
So this is just another thing that takes away. It's like saying for people who like sports cars, well, you can't have a red car. Well, why? Well, because people see red cars speeding. It's like, well, just because the car's red doesn't mean, well, it doesn't matter. We're taking it away. The ATF says that there are between 280,000 and 520,000 possession people of these bump stocks in circulation. It is a betrayal of the gun-owning Second Amendment rights people base that so many of whom turned out, against Hillary and for Donald Trump in his presidential election.
Yeah, I think it's clear that it's a feel-good measure. It's almost a virtue signaling measure in some sense with absolutely no evidence that it will make any difference, just like attempts to remove guns from law-abiding citizens as the remedy for criminals having guns and committing murders. So it really doesn't make a whole lot more sense than that. Let's talk about the Obamacare ruling. Now, we talked earlier about how it's extraordinary to have, in the Michael Flynn trial, the prosecution stand up and actually correct the judge and defend the defendant they're trying to prosecute. Equally unusual or even weird is that the Trump administration went to a district judge to try to get a ruling on Obamacare to get rid of the individual mandate in law. They didn't expect that judge would rule the entire law, I'm not going to say unconstitutional, but no longer valid because it's been severed from its funding mechanism, which is the individual mandate that requires everybody to pay to be in the program.
Roberts and the court, the majority on the Supreme Court, said this is a valid law because it's a tax.
Right.
It's
the
justification. Not a mandate for
right.
purchasing. It's simply a tax.
Even though the Congress did not declare it that.
And then the Congress passed the law that stripped it out, so there is no tax. So now what is it? Now it is an impermissible mandate. The judge says we can't have impermissible mandates. The whole thing has to go. I will give him credit, though, by the way. Unlike some Hawaiian and Washington federal judges that are Obama appointees, this judge knows that the appropriate thing to do when you're going to upheave the whole world with your ruling is to stay your ruling so that the Circuit Court of Appeals can weigh in, as surely they will. And that's an appropriate way to make a sweeping ruling. So while it is a sweeping ruling, I salute the judge for the right way to do it. And
but there's no injunction, so it doesn't really effectively change anything until this has been adjudicated all the way up the judicial system. I want to go back to something we discussed last week, and that was the refusal of Brett Kavanaugh and Chief Justice Roberts to hear a case regarding Planned Parenthood. And the original thought was that Kavanaugh was a little weak-kneed because of the whole thing that happened with him, with Christine Ford and the other women during his confirmation hearing. But I heard an alternative view. I don't know if it's possible or not, but the alternative view was that he saw that Roberts was going to side with the four liberals, Kavanaugh did, and decided as a preventative that he would vote not to take the case instead of allowing it to come before the court and have a ruling that he didn't find favorable. Do you find that possibility persuasive?
There's a term that we don't hear much used anymore, and it's Kremlinologist. And a Kremlinologist kind of looked at what was going on in the black box of the Soviet Union, and would examine who's in what leadership position, try to determine what the actual, what was going on there.
Right.
The Supreme Court's a little bit like that. There's very few public statements by the judges about their thinking and what's going on, absent their actual rulings or their published decisions. And again, this denial of certiorari, or a declination to take the case before the court, was not accompanied by a written response by Kavanaugh. So he hasn't let us know what his reasoning is. So the answer to your question is, that's plausible, but it's just a total black box, I think, at this point. We'll only know in the future when we see his jurisprudence on these issues.
Now, my feeling is that Roberts is not much more reliable than Justice Kennedy was. And so this whole big thing about how Kavanaugh would convert the court into a conservative majority, I mean, given that Roberts was the one who enabled Obamacare to survive, and this decision here, along with Kavanaugh, makes me wonder, is John Roberts any more reliable than Anthony Kennedy? Is the court any more conservative, really, than when Kavanaugh replaced Kennedy?
Well, Kavanaugh's only been on the court for how many months now? It's
right,
it's not
but
long.
The question
We're not
isn't
into
about
double digits.
But the question is not about Kavanaugh; it's about Roberts.
But it's about Roberts on the Kavanaugh court.
Yeah,
or excuse me, Roberts on the Roberts court with Kavanaugh present, and we just won't know until we have more decisions that come out from the court and to see. In fact, I would suggest that even the first year's worth of decisions we won't know. We'll only know when we see some trend lines of where the cases are going, and that's sort of, I think, the more sober way to analyze it. It's not as satisfying as saying this, that, and the other right away, but we just won't know. It's a black box until he says why. We don't have an understanding of it, because that's the nature of how the Supreme Court does its business. It's in private and in closed circles until they publish opinions on it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Scott Cosenza there, and this program, Liberty Nation Radio, and LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, are available to you on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week. We wish you a merry and healthy and happy Christmas and New Year. We will be back at you next week with another live show. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty, and we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.